Over the better part of the last 2 years, the evolution of technology within the retail industry has been astounding. Forced innovation and an endless number of new solutions have paved the way for operators to take full control over their processes and their customer service. So what are these latest solutions and what can you be doing and why should you care about what we're talking about here today? Well, we have all those answers and so much more on this episode of Anyline, Anytime. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great episode of Anyline, Anytime, our podcast series that takes a deep dive into the challenges and opportunities for the many industries that we care so much about. My name is Mark Babin, your host, and it's so great to have you all joining me for this great and pretty information-filled episode. So thank you so much for being with us today. This week,
Thanks,
as you would have guessed from the introduction, it's all about the retail industry and more specifically, the evolution of technology that is available for operations in the space. Now, I don't want to handle this topic alone, and nor would I ever want to. So I'm honored to welcome our guest for this episode, Rachel West. Rachel is a growing expert on this topic, and she's the principal at RevTech Ventures. Rachel leads the early stage investment team that backs entrepreneurs and startups who are helping to create the future of retail through innovation and technological advancement. Rachel, so great to have you on the episode. Thank you so much for joining us. Can't wait to dive into this topic and pick your brain on a lot of these subject matters. So thank you and welcome to the episode.
Thanks, Mark, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. Yeah, great to see you again, like I said, and I know you'll have a lot of great insights for the audience on a lot of these topics that I know we spoke about offline in depth, but of course we want to get this on the record for the audience and in the episode. So again, thank you so much for being here. So diving right into the thick of things, I'd love to start by addressing where you see the greatest demand when it comes to innovation within the retail industry. Now, as a VC, you probably see tons of things cross your desk on a daily basis, but where should that focus be right now?
It's a great question. I think the biggest focus for retailers revolves around two things. So one would be logistics. So last mile, getting that right. Customers are demanding personalization increasingly and, quick turnarounds. And so both online stores and physical stores now have to cater to that. So in addition to seeing a lot of, brick and mortar stores evolve into, fulfillment centers, having to up the customer experience. They also just have to get costs down across the supply chain, across the board. So I think it's really important to look at different shipping solutions, return solutions, things like that to make sure you get it right. I think secondly, there's a huge push for loyalty plays. Some of the more interesting ones that we're looking at right now is around sustainability. So we actually made an investment in a white labeled version of Poshmark for retailers that actually is a loyalty tool as well as an additional revenue stream. So it's called Recurate. And what it does is it's actually allowing retailers to facilitate the resale of used clothing from their brand and then actually work with different customers and facilitate that process without taking on any inventory. So not only are they driving traffic back to their site and allowing consumers to sell on their website, but at the same time, they're giving them a reason to come back, spend more, given the fact that a lot of times these retailers will offer more in loyalty and dollars spent at that actual store versus cold hard cash. And so when you up that, you're incenting more consumer spend in a way that also is aligning with increasing values around sustainability, both, labor, reusable clothing, things of that nature as well.
That's a really nice answer. And I love how you touched on both the logistical side and then the front of house customer service side, because I definitely think that's the two major points of retail. And those are really nice examples of where that focus needs to be. So for industry startups, is this kind of where you're saying they need to be really focusing on right now when they're developing solutions? Is it within these two spaces, or is there a particular spot that you feel like the focus needs to be right now?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say, in venture, we're looking 10 years out.
Mhm.
And so the solutions we're seeing right now in shipping logistics, return logistics, things of that nature have been going for the past 5 to 10 years. And they're just hitting, their critical growth point of growth. And so because of that, the solutions that people start developing now, in reality, they're not going to become full-fledged or fully developed, likely, until 2 years if you're moving really quickly, 5 if you're slow, a little bit slower in building a strong foundation. And so because of that, where we're focusing right now on investment, I would say is ahead or a little bit behind of where people just now developing solutions should look to start developing. So I think those areas that are going to be hot in the upcoming years, so beyond 2021, one, I think you're going to see an increasing use of blockchain technology in retail. I don't think the industry is ready yet. We've invested in a solution called Topol, which is like a startup that uses blockchain to actually validate ethical and sustainable practices. And so I think right now they're focusing a lot on coffee, diamonds, things of that nature. But for the retail industry to actually accommodate that infrastructure, I think it's going to be quite a few years. And so because of that, I think getting retailers ready for that shift in solutions that revolve around using different types of currencies, I think will be very important. I think secondly, we're seeing a different kind of retail emerge nowadays as well, where I'm always bullish that people are going to become in physical stores, but you're seeing the rise of the SMB. And so because of that, I think more solutions geared towards those types of startups are where we're betting our money, and other people should be looking at as well. I think they have a new way of engaging with the customer. I mean, you look at Third Love's campaigns. They have a much tighter relationship with people than I don't want to call out department stores, but for instance, but I guess I am, but like JCPenney, for instance, it's struggling, and it's going to continue to struggle, quite frankly, because it's so big. And so because of that, finding smaller companies that can adopt those solutions quickly and at scale, and using channel partners like Shopify are going to be very important. And then I would say the second reason why that's so important is you're also seeing people trying to compete with Shopify now. So it's going to be the hot space. Like when you look at, big commerce has been there for a while, but you're even seeing newer competitors like cart.com, kind of like a luxury version of Shopify that has all the best in class curated tools. And so because of that, there's an increasing need for tools that are going to serve that middle band of brands, where there's a gap between, I have a small business, I'm one person, and I'm a huge enterprise. And I think those are also going to become the ones that are the enterprises of tomorrow. So if you can grow up with them, I think that's very valuable. And so technology is focusing in that space and making it easier. As we see a lot more also entrepreneurs just in this space as well, with venture growing, I think it's really important to look at solutions that are targeting that group.
Some really great points. And I guess it kind of raises the question, in contrast to what we're saying here, where people should focus, are you seeing technologies focusing on things that perhaps they shouldn't? Like there's no need anymore, it's too late, or this isn't something where the industry is headed? Do you see things like that? And perhaps, I guess, for the companies out there doing these, perhaps this could be useful for them to maybe make a pivot.
Yeah, I'm going to say a few controversial things because I think, this is an opinion podcast. So just noting that this is my very subjective opinion and not de facto. I'm not saying to shut down your startup if you do these things, but, one area that I particularly don't see, I see a hard pathway to success would be actually in those 3D fit solutions. I think it's very hard to tie 3D fit directly to revenue growth. And so when you're in the mind of a retailer, being able to track, this generated X amount of uplift in sales, right?
Mm-hmm.
This generated an X percentage reduction in returns. Those are all very valuable metrics, but I think one, it's really hard to couple that technology with actual metrics that are going to prove those things. And then secondly, I think when you look at how subjective fit is for customers, some people like it really loose. Some people like it really tight. Some people don't know. They just know if they don't like it. You know, I'm one of those people where my fit changes all the time on how I like my clothes to fit. And so with that, it's just very difficult for technology to predict human sentiment. And I think that's at least for right now, where technology's at. And so I think, you know, those types of startups and we've seen quite a few, are going to face a long uphill battle.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think that's really nice. And it provides a direction. I think it gives guidance to the companies who are maybe looking at integrating something like this, to just be like, don't waste the money, you know, focus on the areas you say where you need to focus on, because that's where the demand will be. I love how you said you need to look further away rather than tomorrow, because you're not going to be ready tomorrow. Your technology is not going to be integrated tomorrow. It's going to be down the line. So I love that you mentioned that. So that's a really, really great point. So I want to make a bit of a shift here. And we spoke about this a bit in our previous conversations, and I thought it was really, really interesting and valuable. So I wanted to bring it up to this conversation, obviously, for the audience to gain this same insight that I was given. We see technology advancing really quick in the B2C space overall, and at a much higher and faster rate than compared to the B2B space. And so you work with companies that are trying to provide both, like you said, on the back end and the logistics and the operational side, but then also on the customer side, with that B2C side of technology. Maybe they're doing loyalty program applications or other technologies. But from your perspective, why do you see that B2B side move slower traditionally?
Yeah, so I think why you typically are going to see that B2B side move slower is just the political minutia of corporations and the barrier for success. And so, for instance, when we're looking at new startups, typically when we invest, you know, they're pre-seed, seed, usually have one pilot underway or one customer. So they've validated their product, but they're still looking to scale. I think in those situations, a lot of times we advise to go with smaller companies first, test it out, because they're more willing to work with them before they go to very large enterprises, because that sales cycle is going to be extremely drawn out. And so even if you look at the size of the company as a spectrum, all I can think about is when you're dealing with one consumer versus an entire corporation, whether that's 50 people or whether that's 5,000, it's just going to take a lot longer because there's more decision makers. There's probably more structured KPIs on what they're hitting in that moment. So, you know, even though a solution may be helpful, it may not tie with that director's business goals that you're meeting with. And so for that reason, they pass over you. Whereas on the consumer side, not only do these technologies typically have a lower amount of investment per customer, right? So one perfect example would be Cooklist, right? They have a B2B side and a B2C side. For those that don't know who Cooklist is, it's like a integrated grocery store app. So not only can it understand everything that's in your pantry, and it'll generate recipes based on what you can cook with what's in your pantry. On the flip side, it can also, understand you can pick certain recipes or meal plans, and it'll automatically add those correct proportions to your cart. And so my point with that is you're going to see there's multiple revenue streams, but for the customer side, obviously you're going to have the transaction fee that Cooklist gets and a subscription fee for that customer that's using the app. That's a little bit easier, right? And so you're going to see the barrier to adopt that technology is much lower. There's not as much training, especially in a consumer-centered app. There shouldn't be. And if there is, you're doing something wrong with your app. And then on the flip side, when you're looking at B2B, right, that's different product placement. So you're working with higher dollar values, right? It's a bigger decision. It takes more work to implement. And so I think all of those things are going to make that B2B side grow slower. And so one thing we always recommend is, look, if if you know your product is ultimately going to go to customers, right? Make sure you're building it around the customer. And then, let the market show like where they value your product from the business aspect as well. So I think that can be pretty helpful. But at the end of the day, it's just you're dealing with more people. So it's going to be slower on the B2B side.
Yeah. And I guess the comfort zone, again, like you said, for that, when there's more people involved, they're usually playing things a bit more conservatively. I know we just started working with a large retailer here in Europe, and they're doing a test in a certain region to see if it's willing to roll out to a larger scale. So I think there's multiple steps, like you're saying, but definitely these smaller focused areas, they're willing to take the risk more on new technologies and perhaps maybe leapfrog their competitors. I mean, we see it in a lot of spaces, and maybe you can comment on this as well, but the big players, and then medium and small, and all the medium and small, there's millions of them, and they fight over what's left basically. So the opportunity for them to adopt something new is massive for them. It's risk versus reward versus a large company, I guess, has a lot more to lose. Would that be accurate?
I would say that's one component of it, is a company has a lot more to lose. I think the other thing is, I would say larger companies have more access to build things in-house as well. And so they can a lot of times build their own solution for some of the companies we invest in, unless you have some other proprietary IP. So I think that's another component that you have to consider is it too big to where this enterprise is going to build it itself? And that's what can slow it down, because they're internally evaluating the build versus buy case while you present your startup, which I don't know, it's kind of like killing a baby in startup land if a big company copies your startup and then says they're not interested, which I've seen happen, and it makes me sad, but that's true. So I think that's one thing that can slow down the process. And I think secondly, given that it takes a long time to get people on board, I think what also is going to slow that process down is more of the long-term impact that technology could have on the whole company and the training required to actually implement it. So for instance, if you have like Indeer, for instance, it's like a sales associate enablement platform. So it's like clienteling, but allows store associates that say no one's coming in a physical store at the time. It allows them to engage with their customers online. Something like that started with smaller companies, moved really quickly, and now they're seeing that there's actually a demand in the enterprise space. But what you're also seeing is training a sales force of 25K sales associates is going to be, to use a technology and interact with it, is going to be very different than 10. And so I just think that's another thing, is you're dealing with a higher volume of human capital. And I think people are great, but it's going to slow things down a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really nice transition to what I wanted to ask next. And it's something that we see a lot in every industry that we're involved with. And it's definitely one of the biggest challenges that we face, that we see customers facing with and the industry facing. But that's that too many people are doing too many unnecessary things. And when we look at retail, it seems extremely relevant with how much cognitive tasks and things that should not take as long as they do, but we see a lot of people getting bogged down by these tasks, especially in retail, when maybe things can be a bit more automated or things can be a bit more improved, the processes and things like that. Again, that's just one example of one area of the retail industry. But from your experience, where else do you see an open door for retail operators when they're looking at really enabling their employees, liberating their employees so that they can be more efficient, and businesses can move past that threshold where perhaps they're limited by growth and future potential simply because they're bogged down by all these menial tasks?
Yeah, so I would say, like, in terms of new applications and what the future of work looks like, I think, one, you're seeing a lot of these new models like Amazon Go for everyone else, right? So we're in a company called Excel Robotics. We were with them from very beginning when they were robots running around in stores, and then later pivoted to more of the Amazon Go model. But with that, people are able to walk into a convenience store, grab something and leave without having to scan their ID or anything. And so, or go to a checkout counter. So you're not going to have a cashier anymore, right? In these stores. And so I think for things that require less of a white glove touch, for instance, like Louis Vuitton, probably always going to have a sales associate trying to upsell, and people like human connection. But for things that require less of that human connection with, small transaction volume, things of that nature, you're seeing, things that are displacing them. And so now instead of working to cashier, you're looking at someone that's restocking, right? Or they're cleaning the floors, which, those items also are starting to go away. And I've seen technologies with drones that are actually now able to be in charge of restocking. And so, then you're going to see that higher level application where now that person is managing the store. And so I think, that's also why we're seeing that bigger divide in the, salaries and income, is because technology is starting to displace that middle, those people in the middle, unfortunately. And so, you're seeing those people now become like delivery people, right? And so delivering products to customers as drivers, or you're seeing them now, managing technology, understanding if the technology is in sync and coming through data. So I think that's one thing where we're seeing jobs go. I think more on the flexibility aspect, you look at the last McKinsey study, and 70% of retailers actually plan to rely on the flex economy over the next 3 years. And they're overspending right now by over 20% on labor just due to these outdated labor models. And so because of that, you're seeing new gig wage labor models. So kind of Uber, but make it retail. I think it's very hard to pull it off. And there's actually a few solutions I'm really excited about in the space that we're watching right now. And you're going to start seeing people rolling these models out. But I think it's more complex than an Uber or something of that nature, because, sales is a very important skill, but it's also what, you can't just walk up to a customer anymore and say, like, would you like me to check you out? Those days are gone by, the tune of 20 years plus. But I think at the same time, if you have a way to transparently vet associates, understand like who's the best in class, be able to upskill them. I think you're going to see like people being able to vote for where they work without as big of a long-term commitment. And retailers are willing to spend that money to get people that are going to show up on time for work and things of that nature. But I think secondly, you're going to see the rise of micro certifications. And so because, like we talked about, people are getting increasingly specialized in their roles and really good at what they do. I think there's going to be this new wave of retailers actually rolling out specific competencies that it's up to that worker to achieve to get that next promotion. And so, talking to retailers, I can already name, know of a few that are doing this, but I think you're going to see that increasingly as well to prepare those people for what these new roles are.
So the retailers that are doing these things and that are being proactive towards this movement, do you feel like they're setting themselves up better, like future-proofing themselves for this new era of retail by being proactive?
Absolutely. Because I think this model is very messy. Mm-hmm. I don't think you're going to be able to figure out how to do this overnight. I mean, you're looking at California labor laws and how that impacted the gig economy. Who's to say that, those laws aren't going to become more common as you see people find ways to employ workers without giving them any benefits, right? I don't know if that's the right thing to do either, but I do think there's also something to be said about being loyal to a company. And so those two things are trade-offs, but I don't think anyone has quite figured out that formula yet on how to deal with a new Gen Z population that wants to have their cake and eat it too. And they want work-life balance, and they want, to work at their leisure. So I'm not saying these things are all what I'm saying needs to happen, but I'm saying that's the attitude of the new generation. And so retailers are trying to figure out how to meet those needs, and the ones that don't, like, I mean, you've already seen the writing on the wall for all of the historical bankruptcies that have happened. I have a chart that I can't show right now, but it's like you see, I think there's been like over 100 major retail bankruptcies in the past 10 years of like top retailers. And so because of this, they're just going to die. I mean, you can innovate or you can die. And if you can't speak the language of your workforce, I don't know how you're going to be able to hire them, but best of luck to those people.
Yeah. So you really need to be proactive, and you really need to take this chance right now while the economy is coming back and while sort of this post-pandemic world is emerging. Now is the time to do it. No, that's a really great way to wrap up the conversation. I think it gives the operators listening that motivation to take steps forward. And that's exactly what we want to do today. So that's perfect. Thank you so much. Again, amazing insights, some really great in-depth answers that I know will help those listening. So Rachel, thank you so much. And I completely agree. The time is now to make these changes and to be proactive. So that's a great way to end. Yeah. Any last final notes before we wrap up the session, Rachel?
Not in particular. Thanks for having me. And it's always fun to geek out on talking about the future of retail. If anyone has any questions, they're more than welcome to ping me on LinkedIn. And always happy to be helpful wherever I can. But thanks for having me. And I think, you guys put together a very fantastic production. So
I appreciate
it was great to see you again, Mark.
Good. Absolutely. Again, thank you so much. Best of luck for the rest of the year with RevTech. I know obviously tons happening, but I can't wait to see it. And again, like we said, the future collaborations between what you guys are doing, what we're doing, obviously can't wait to talk more about that offline. But again, thank you so much for joining today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. And likewise, it was a blast.
Excellent. And for the audience watching, thank you so very much for joining on this episode. Hopefully lots for you to take away and absorb. If you do have any questions about what we spoke about today, or you want to add to the conversation, please feel free to do so. You can go ahead and do so in the comments below the video, or you can reach out to Rachel or myself. We'll put the LinkedIn descriptions in the video, and you'll be able to contact directly if you want to ask questions, get in touch, maybe get more information on what RevTech is all about from Rachel. Don't hesitate. Those LinkedIn description will be there, so you can go ahead and find them there. But of course, until the very next episode, wishing you all a fantastic day wherever in the world you may be. And as always, stay happy, stay healthy. I'll see you on the next episode.